I used to think the worst thing that could happen to a marriage was for a husband to walk out the front door. I was wrong. My husband never left me. Not for another woman. Not for another life. Not even for a weekend without telling me where he was going. He came home every night for 57 years. And somehow, by the time I was 82, I had never felt more alone. My name is Helen. I am 85 years old, and if there is one thing I want you to understand before I tell you what happened between my husband and me, it is this: you can share a bed with someone for half a century and still spend years wishing they would finally see you. I know because I lived it. I met Thomas in the spring of 1964. I was 23, he was 26, and he worked at a hardware store 3 streets from my mother's house. He had dark hair then, thick eyebrows, and a habit of rubbing his thumb against the side of his index finger whenever he was nervous. He proposed after 11 months. We married on April 17, 1965. There was no grand romance after that. There was something quieter. We bought a small brick house. We had 2 children, Margaret and Daniel. Thomas worked 6 days a week for almost 30 years. I taught elementary school until Margaret was born, then stayed home for a while before returning to work. We paid our mortgage. We repaired the roof. We argued about money. We worried about the children. We celebrated Christmas. We buried our parents. We grew older. From the outside, we were fine. That was the problem. Nobody ever asked if we were happy because we looked like the kind of couple who didn't have problems. And I became very good at pretending. At 41, I remember standing in our kitchen at 10:30 on a Tuesday night. Thomas was sitting at the table reading the newspaper. I had spent the entire evening preparing dinner, helping Daniel with his homework, washing dishes, and folding laundry. I wanted him to look at me. Not because I wanted praise. I wanted him to ask, "How was your day?" He didn't. He folded the newspaper and said, "What time are we leaving Saturday?" I said, "For your mother's?" "Yeah. 10. Okay." Then he went upstairs. I stood alone in that kitchen with my hands still wet from the dishes. The refrigerator hummed. The clock ticked. And I remember thinking something that frightened me. He knows everything about my life, but he doesn't know me. I didn't say it. I dried my hands and went upstairs. That became my pattern. Something hurt me. I stayed quiet. Thomas didn't notice. So I became quieter. At 52, our children had both left home. The house became strangely large. There were 2 empty bedrooms, an empty driveway most mornings, and 2 people sitting at the same kitchen table who had spent years talking mostly about schedules. One Sunday morning, I made pancakes. Thomas sat down and looked at his plate. "You put too much cinnamon in these." I laughed. "I know. I was experimenting." He shook his head. "You always do that." It was such a small sentence. But something inside me cracked. I looked at him and said, "Do you ever notice anything I do right?" He looked genuinely confused. "What are you talking about?" "Nothing." "Then why did you say it?" I stood up and took his plate. "Eat something else." He stared at me. Neither of us understood that this was the beginning of a distance that would last another 20 years. At 61, we went on a trip to the coast for our anniversary. 38 years married. We stayed in a little hotel with blue curtains and a balcony overlooking the water. I thought maybe being somewhere different would make us different. That evening, I put on a dress I hadn't worn in years. Thomas looked at me and said, "Are you ready? Do I look nice?" He glanced up from his phone. "Yeah. You look fine." "Fine." I smiled. We went downstairs. We ate dinner. We talked about the weather. We talked about the hotel. We talked about the price of gasoline. We did not talk about us. When we returned to the room, Thomas fell asleep within minutes. I stood on the balcony until midnight listening to the ocean. I was 61 years old. I had been married for 38 years. And I was lonely. Not the kind of lonely you feel when nobody is around. The worst kind. The kind you feel when someone is right beside you. At 70, Thomas retired. I thought things would finally change. They didn't. We were together all day now. Breakfast. Television. Lunch. Errands. Dinner. Bed. More time together somehow made the silence louder. One afternoon, I came into the living room and found him asleep in his chair. I stood there watching his chest rise and fall. His hair had turned completely white. His hands were thinner. There were liver spots on his skin. Suddenly, I realized something terrible. We had spent more time together than most couples ever get. And I couldn't remember the last time we had truly talked. Not about bills. Not about doctors. Not about the children. About what we were afraid of. About what we wanted. About what we regretted. About whether we still loved the lives we had built. I sat across from him. Thomas? He opened his eyes. What? Are you happy? He looked at me for a long time. Then he said, of course. Why? He frowned. Because I'm here. That answer stayed with me. Because I'm here. I realized that was how Thomas understood love. Presence. Responsibility. Coming home. Fixing things. Paying bills. Being there. But I had spent my life needing something else. I needed words. I needed curiosity. I needed tenderness. I needed him to look at me and ask what was happening inside me. And neither of us had ever learned how to translate that. Then came November 8, 2022. I was 82. Thomas was 85. We were sitting at the kitchen table after dinner. It was raining hard enough that we could hear it against the windows. Thomas had his usual cup of black coffee. I was staring at my hands. For almost 20 minutes, neither of us spoke. Then I said, Thomas, I don't think you've really known me for a very long time. He put his cup down. What does that mean? It means I've been lonely for years. He looked hurt. I'm right here. And there it was. The sentence that explained our entire marriage. I looked at him and said, that's exactly what I'm talking about. He didn't answer. I continued. I never needed you to leave, Thomas. I needed you to come closer. His eyes filled with tears. I had never seen him cry. Not when his father died. Not when our daughter got married. Not even when our son moved across the country. But that night, his hand began to shake. He whispered, I thought coming home was enough. I reached across the table. His hand was cold. I thought being here was enough too, I said. We sat there holding hands. For the first time in decades, neither of us tried to escape the silence. And then Thomas said something I will carry until I die. I was lonely too, Helen. I didn't know what to say. So I cried. He cried. And for the first time in 57 years, we were finally having the conversation we should have had when we were young. Not an argument. Not an accusation. A conversation. Thomas died 11 months later. December 19, 2023. He was asleep when it happened. There was no dramatic goodbye. No final speech. Just a quiet morning and the sound of rain against the window. After the funeral, people told me how lucky I was. 57 years, they said. What a beautiful marriage. I always smiled. But now, at 85, I understand something I didn't understand when I was 23. A marriage isn't measured by how many years two people remain in the same house. It is measured by how much of themselves they are willing to bring into that house. Thomas never left me. But for years, neither of us really arrived. That is what I call the invisible distance. It isn't created by cheating. It isn't created by divorce. It is created by thousands of tiny moments when you think, I'll tell them tomorrow. Tomorrow becomes next week. Next week becomes next year. And eventually, you realize you've spent 20 years protecting yourself from a conversation that could have brought you closer. If you are sitting beside someone you love tonight, ask them one question you normally avoid. Not, did you pay the bill? Not, what time are we leaving? Ask, what have you been carrying that you never told me? Then listen. Don't defend yourself. Don't explain. Just listen. Because I spent decades believing Thomas didn't care. The truth was more complicated. He cared deeply. He simply didn't know how to show me in the language I needed. And I was so determined to protect myself from disappointment that I never taught him. Maybe you're thinking, my husband is just like that. Maybe you're thinking, we've been married too long to change now. I understand. I used those excuses too. But if I could sit at my old kitchen table again, with my 41-year-old hands wet from the dishes and Thomas reading that newspaper, I would dry my hands, sit beside him, and say what I was too afraid to say. I don't want you to just come home. I want you to come back to me. I still have that kitchen clock. It is small, brass, and slightly scratched on the left side. It has been ticking for more than 50 years. For a long time, I thought the sound meant time was passing. Now I understand something else. It was reminding me to speak. Because silence doesn't always mean peace. Sometimes it means two people are waiting for the other one to begin. And sometimes, one of them runs out of time.